My name is Leonard Lasko, and I'm a physician, obstetrician, gynecologist by profession. And I started to do healing work over the years. People are usually interested in how that came to be. I was in a deep meditation a number of years ago. I had a revelation that my work was to heal with love. And at that time, I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that it was true. And then over the years, I discovered, in fact, what that meant. I liked work with patients in my office, and what might be called miracles occurred. As a consequence of that, I decided to go into the laboratory, a number of universities in the area that I lived, San Francisco Bay Area, and explore what was happening in the realm of healing. That revelation was that my work was to heal with love. But what was this love that was responsible for the healing? So I went into the laboratory and I began to explore initially with bacteria, and then subsequently with cancer cells grown in tissue culture. Because when I discovered in doing healing work with my patients that there were so many variables involved with healing. In fact, there was, of course, the placebo effect, where, as you know, you give someone a sugar pill or an injection of a salt solution, tell them that it's a medication, and approximately 30, even up to 50% of people would actually respond. So it was important to go to the laboratory and find out what was happening in the interaction between me and my patients, because I knew that what was happening was more than simply a belief. This was beyond belief. There was an interaction between my consciousness and the consciousness of those that I was working with. But how to determine that? So that's why I started working initially with bacteria, salmonella, which causes dysentery in humans. And my intention when I started working with the bacteria was to just reduce their growth rate using intentionality. So I looked under the microscope at the petri dish containing the bacteria as the start of this exploration, and suddenly I had what you might call an epiphany. It seemed to me that these bacteria had as much right to exist as I did, because they were created by the same source that created me. They were created by the same creator that created me, and they had as much right to be here as I did. Just from my human perspective, I call them pathogens. They produced what I call disease. But that shift, that total acceptance of their presence shifted something in me. My awareness dropped all the conditioned filters that I had had, all my training, just dropped away in those moments, and I totally accepted unconditionally the existence of this bacteria. And when that happened, my awareness began to vibrate at the same frequency as the consciousness of that bacteria. In essence, we were like two tuning forks with the same frequency. We became one energetically. And then when I introduced an intention in that field of oneness or wholeness, I found subsequently that I could reduce their growth rate by 50% relative to contemporaneous controls. And what I realized was that when I unconditionally accepted their existence, that's another way of expressing unconditional love. Because if you stop to think about it, if you unconditionally are accepted exactly as you are, without any exceptions, what you would feel is loved. And so then I came to understand what this revelation was. So unconditional acceptance of what is love. That's also truth. So ultimately, love and truth are one and the same. Then I went on to explore other aspects of love with the bacteria. I won't go into great detail, but basically we found, as I started to do this, that if we put increasing amounts of an antibiotic in a series of test tubes containing bacteria, exact amounts of bacteria, and then we used a control group that contained exact amounts of bacteria and increasing amounts of an antibiotic. And we took the test group, and I said, my intention was to protect all life forms in solution. And I came into a loving acceptance, just as I had done before, of that bacteria. We came into oneness at the level of consciousness. And we found that loving intention can protect the bacteria from the lethal effects of antibiotics, while the control group essentially was killed by the antibiotics. So love was a real force. It wasn't just the stuff of mystics and poets. It wasn't just sentimental love that we see in movies. That's a pale reflection of a deeper, unconditioned love that we're all at a very deep level aware of. Well, that changed my life, because then I came to understand what it meant to heal with love. And then I began to do research in a few other major universities on cancer cells, the growth of cancer cells grown in tissue culture. And I explored different intentions, the impact of different intentions on the growth of cancer cells, and also explored the relationship between a thought intention and an image intention. And that was very fascinating and interesting too. After I had done all this research, I realized that now it was time for me to leave my very busy practice in San Francisco and devote myself to healing and develop technologies which put into practice what I learned in the laboratory. And I subsequently worked with DNA and was able to unwind and rewind the DNA, worked with water and was able to change the structure of water and document that in a variety of scientific techniques. And then developed a system of healing which I call holo-energetic healing, healing with the energy of the whole. So people are interested in how DNA can be unwound and rewound. People are interested in how the structure of water can be changed through intentionality. But it's not only intentionality, and I found for me what was the secret, and the secret was a loving connection. And when we talk about loving connection, we mean that there's an awareness of oneness with whatever you focus on as the object of your awareness. There is an urge to merge with the object of awareness, so that there is no separation, because separation is only an appearance, a point of view, an illusion. When you're aware of that and you become one with whatever it is you're merging with, you, by virtue of your consciousness, have a dominion over the consciousness of that which you're focused on, because you are aware of the oneness, and that consciousness wants to move into oneness. So when I started doing this research, I went into the laboratory of a group in California called the Institute of Heart Math. I had initially focused, before I contacted them, I had initially focused on my heart, went into my heart, and the energetic heart in the center of my chest. And I recalled some wonderful feelings that I had that opened my heart. There are different ways of doing that. For me, it was my little girl playing with me under the bed covers. I was the monster and she was the afraid of me, and we were just giggling and having the most wonderful time. And that just opened my heart. That was one example of a good feeling. When that happens, something very interesting occurs to the electrophysiology of the body. The energy that comes from the heart becomes coherent. That is, the frequencies that normally come from the heart are somewhat chaotic. In fact, they're variable, and that's been well documented. But something interesting happens when you really, really feel love in your heart, or some of the frequencies of love, like deep care, compassion, forgiveness. These frequencies start to group together and come into phase with one another, and they become what we call coherent. And a laser, for example, is coherent light. And when light is made coherent, the energy becomes squared, so it's much more powerful, which is why a laser beam can be used to burn through steel, for example. So you, in effect, when you feel genuinely loving, become laser-like. And if you introduce an intention in that laser-like field, its power is tremendously enhanced. So then, in that condition of loving awareness, focusing on the DNA that's derived from a human placenta. It's in a powdered form, and it's dissolved in a specific concentration in a solution, and a light is shined through it through a particular instrument called a spectrophotometer, an ultraviolet spectrophotometer, and it has a particular pattern like a signature or fingerprint that's characteristic of it. And when everyone is pretty much aware that DNA comes with two strands of that are called a double helix, and these two strands contain essentially the genetic pattern, and they're held together by hydrogen bonds. And my first intention was to, in this state of love, to snip the hydrogen bonds, and then the DNA starts to separate, and we run that through the spectrophotometer, and we see a change in the pattern. We were able to reverse that by heating the DNA, which unwinds it. It's called denaturing it. It unwinds the DNA, and we were able to, in a sense, heal the DNA by rewinding it using a reverse intention, and we were able to do that. And again, the key was to come into loving resonance with it and then introduce that intention. Now, what's really exciting about this is that we can teach people how to do this. And of course, in order for a cell to replicate, the DNA has to unwind. If you want to keep a cell from replicating, by rewinding the DNA, you keep it from multiplying. And in fact, we were able to demonstrate this at one of the university laboratories using the uptake of radioactive thymidine, which is one of the components, one of the amino acid components of DNA, the uptake of radioactive thymidine in the nucleus of these growing cancer cells, and then comparing against controls. We were able to reduce When we worked with cancer cells, we were able to reduce their growth rate by 40% relative to controls, or increase their growth rate by 15% if that's what we intended. Able to unwind and rewind the DNA, that's one of the mechanisms by which we do that. And again, just to emphasize that what was very exciting was that we can teach people how to do this because our essential nature is loving awareness. That's all. It's been veiled from us frequently by our early conditioning, childhood experiences, experiences in the womb, societal considerations. But once we are able to dissolve these veils that hide our inner light of loving awareness, we too can have access to this love which connects us with whatever it is in a way that brings us into oneness and makes any intention, or you could say prayer, more powerful, because prayer is essentially an intention as well. This is what I discovered, and in working with water, and we did this in 1990, we started doing this research long before Dr. Emoto became famous. We found that we could focus on water and charge the water with loving energy, and then we can measure a change in the bond angle between the oxygen and the two hydrogen atoms, and it changed from 105 degrees to 109 degrees, and that changed the acidity, and that changed the surface tension and the solubility. And in the seminars that I give, we do this with wine and or water, and we have the group focus on a decanter of wine, and we have wine from one bottle poured into two decanters. We focus on one decanter and set the other aside. We send loving energy to the decanter containing the wine that's placed in the center of the room. And it's just amazing how the bouquet of the wine and the taste of the wine is so different from the wine that was not charged. And we do the same thing with water. Now, what's interesting about this and the application is, it's not just a parlor trick. Our bodies contain approximately 70% water. So when we put someone in the center of a loving circle, and we send unconditioned love to that person, and then we introduce an intention for healing, we've gotten some really profound results, profound healing results with people that way. I mean, there was a boy who had a clubfoot. He was about 5 or 6 months old, and we visualized him running and having just normally having fun with his friends and so on. And in fact, the reports that we've gotten, even from the physician, indicate that something remarkable has happened. So that's what healing with love turned out to be. Again, the key thing is that we could demonstrate in the laboratory when you're in a coherent, loving state, and in that state, you can do what used to be called magical or miracle things. Now we understand that's not magical in that sense, it's not miraculous, it's unconditioned love. After I had this revelation that my work was to heal with love, it might have been about 9 months later, I was at another conference, and I had as a roommate a young man who was in his 30s who had metastatic cancer, and he had cancer in his lungs and in his both kidneys. And during the first night, I was awakened because I heard him having trouble breathing, and it sounded like he was in pain. So I went over to his bed and I said, "Can I help?" And he said, anything, doc. And since I didn't have any medication to relieve his pain, I just spontaneously sat down on his bed, and I placed my hands on both sides of his chest, and then above my head, there was a spontaneously appearing a golden ball of light like the sun, and a beam of light down through the top of my head to my heart, and it overflowed out through my hands, and it was recreated between my hands, this golden sun. And just holding my hands there without any intention for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then he said, "Oh, the pain is gone, doc, the pain is gone." And he went to sleep that night. He slept well. And the next morning when he woke up, he said, "You know, doc, you're really a healer." And that reminded me, your work is to heal with love. And that's what started me exploring in my practice selectively with patients. And a number of amazing things were taking place, and that's what encouraged me to go into the laboratory to determine what really was going on here. One of the things that I discovered in the course of the research that I was doing was I was on the scientific advisory board of this organization called the Institute of Heart Math in California, where they've been exploring these heart-based loving energies and their association with healing and their association with improved learning. And one of the things that we discovered there was that, as I had mentioned before, our loving awareness is our birthright. So everyone has the capacity to heal, more or less. We were able to demonstrate this. We took 10 people and taught them how to develop a coherent heart focus, which is, as I said, the field in which you introduce an intention, and then you get the impact of that intention. And you can measure that with bacteria, you can measure it with cancer cells, you can measure it with water, you can measure it with DNA, and you can see the impact in terms of healing responses with people. And so if those 10 people were trained in that method, they were successful in doing what they intended to do. And we took 10 people who were not trained in that method, gave them the same intention, and they were not able to accomplish what the intention had set out for them. In other words, the goal of the intention. So the key to this whole process then is not whether or not you are innately able to heal, but whether you are able to access your own inner loving awareness in a particular way. That's not to deny that some people have special healing gifts that were innately presented to them in the same way that a musician sometimes is very gifted. He's come into the world with a gift. What I've found, and I've trained thousands of people in healing methodologies, what I've found is that if there's someone who is not particularly gifted in healing, but is very focused, very intent on learning how to heal, that persistent person can do better in the long run than someone who's naturally talented, but a little lazy in developing their healing skills. So again, everyone has the ability to heal. In fact, the body knows how to heal. No healing could take place without the capacity of the body to heal. The body heals itself, and it doesn't matter whether love is present or not for the body to heal. You can be an unhappy person, an angry person, you can cut yourself, and your body will heal. Love facilitates the healing process. It makes that healing take place more quickly. It changes the ability, and this has been rather well documented as well, and people can go to my website, which is lasco.net, and go to the resource section and read about all of these research experiences in a variety of papers. So again, healing is inherent within us, within our bodies, and we all have the capacity to facilitate the healing process. You can also, conversely, interfere with the healing process of the body. You cut yourself and you keep opening it, you put dirt in the wound, you can inhibit the healing process. So it makes sense that you can also facilitate the healing process. And the prime facilitator of healing, in my experience, is love, unconditioned love. And what unconditioned love does is it aligns you with the natural order and harmony of the universe. It's like Rupert Sheldrake has suggested a morphogenetic field that exists that basically holds the template or form of the natural healed organ or system that you're focused on. And when you access that field through love and intention, it facilitates the healing process. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in God and if I believe that it's God that heals. And it's quite a fair question. I remember when Carl Jung was asked if he believed in God, he said no, he doesn't believe in God, he knows God because he's had the direct experience of it. So what I found in doing this work and teaching for many years is that when you use the word God, it means so many different things to so many different people that it becomes a vague and almost dangerous word because it's also a concept to many people, and they have a lot of energy and emotion behind it or against it. So what I prefer is to use the word source and to simply say that in my experience, my direct knowing, there is one source, there is only one, appearing as many, revealing itself as love. There is only one source, there is only one, not just source, but only one, that appears as many forms. Also, that one source represents many paths that ultimately lead back to oneness. So if you are tapping into that source and you call it your God, and you call upon that one source through your notion or concept of God, through any image that represents that, and that divine force energy comes through and interacts with whatever it is you're focused on for healing. And remember that the word healing and the word wholeness come from the same root. It brings whatever you're focused on into wholeness. So that's the way I prefer to deal with it. We don't get into theology. We try to keep it as simple as possible without any terminology that's based on religion, culture, or other traditions. So, of course, people, as we talk about source, people ask, so what is the source? And that's not something that can be described or defined because it's beyond the capacity of the mind to know or to understand. When we talk about oneness, and we say there's only one, and we talk about oneness, for those who have had the direct, we could talk about it as the direct experience of oneness only when there's a return from oneness and it's being described, then you talk about it as an experience. But it's beyond experience because experience comes and goes. And the oneness that we're referring to, we can refer to by another word, but unfortunately we're using words which just simply point to something which is beyond words. It's like the finger that points to the moon. The words are the finger, and a lot of people concentrate on the finger and try to understand the finger. It's what the finger is pointing to. So another word that points to source is awareness. Now, that's not a word that is easily translated in French. In French, apparently it's translated as consciousness. But the way that I describe source then is pure awareness. And when awareness becomes aware of itself, then that's the first existence. I am aware. That's what in English I call consciousness, but in French it's consciousness aware of itself. So that's the first existence. But before that first existence, there's only consciousness itself. And since there's only consciousness itself, it does not know itself, because in order for knowing to occur, duality has to be present. There has to be something that's known, there has to be the knower, and there has to be the knowing. So before there's any knowing, there's only consciousness or source, and so it can't be described. There are no qualities that can be pointed to it. And so for the mind looks at it and says, if you can't describe it, then it doesn't exist. If you can't tell me why and what it is, it doesn't exist. And this is the arrogance of the mind, but it's also its natural function. The natural function of the mind is to compartmentalize things and put them into little cubby holes and then say, this I know to be so, and this I know not to be so. So this is the function of the mind. The mind tries to grasp that. This is beyond the capacity of the mind. And that's why people use meditative techniques to still the mind and go to that still place that we can also call source. That place of presence in the moment, that we can also say is at one with source. So we're using words, and we're using language which is structured to take the whole and break it up into subject-object. And that's the function of the mind, to create subject-object from the whole. It's unable to do that with source, because source contains everything and is beyond subject-object and beyond mind. In my seminars, one of the things that we do is we create a coherent love circle at the end of the day, in which everyone goes into their heart space, recalls a time when they feel loving and loved, and then recalls a time right now in their life when there's something they feel gratitude for, or something they feel loving about. So they recall it in present time as well as in past time, as they're breathing in and out through the center of their chest, which activates their heart space. And then they can imagine putting someone that is in need of love, healing, attention in the center of the circle. And even, of course, that person is not there, but that person is imagined to be there. And one fellow did this with his mother, who was 1,000 miles away, or almost like 2,000 kilometers away. And his mother had ovarian cancer, and she was being treated with chemotherapy. The chemotherapy was not effective, apparently, and the doctors were going to switch her to a more toxic, potent chemotherapy. So they stopped her chemotherapy, and there's a blood measure called the CA-125, which measures the level of ovarian cancer, essentially markers in the blood. And hers was 400, which was quite high. So without her knowing it, he sent her this loving, healing energy. And in that week, when she stopped the chemotherapy and the doctors were going to start the next week, they got another blood test, a CA-125, and it had dropped very significantly during that time, and they had never seen anything like that. And they questioned her, and her son said, "Mom, I sent you this healing energy during this week. I didn't tell you that, but that's what happened." And they said that was remarkable, and they sent a letter to the son saying, "We have never seen this, keep doing what you're doing," and so on and so forth. And so I got a letter from the doctor about that, and again, they have no explanation for what happened and why. And that's just one example of the impact of distant healing. It definitely works. Never say 100% of the time, because there are other variables that are involved in healing, including persons, you could say, karmic experiences in the past, including their own belief systems, the disease process itself, other environmental factors that are impacting on the condition as well. So this is a very complex phenomenon, but the fact that it does work sometimes so dramatically is amazing. And I had mentioned earlier that we did the same thing with a little boy who had clubfoot, and that seemed, we saw that, and it was documented, and then that dramatically changed in a way that the orthopedic surgeons said they had not seen that change. You always have to point out that there's no guarantee here. And that's why we go back ultimately to source and say that the healing doesn't come from the, quote, healer, unquote, or I prefer the term facilitator. It comes from what we called before source. And the healer or the facilitator is simply the vehicle for that energy that comes through. And so the healer can't take any credit for the healing that takes place, and can't take any blame if it doesn't take place. It either does or it doesn't. It's wonderful if it does, but it's not their responsibility either way, whether it does or it doesn't. It's just their responsibility is to become as clean and clear a vessel for divine energy as possible. And that's their whole responsibility. What happens after that has nothing to do with them. And that's the deep truth. Anything other than that is a mental illusion. would say the most important part of this question of whether someone is a charlatan or not is, how can you tell, if you are choosing to go to a healer, how can you tell whether someone is a genuine facilitator or pretending to be? And for that, you can trust your heart. Follow your heart. When you come in, if you come into that person's presence, if you feel loved by that person, if there's a sense of compassion and gentleness and love, then you can allow yourself to undergo whatever the process is. If you don't feel the love, it's time to turn around and leave. Because if you've got someone who is operating just mentally and says, I can manipulate the world mentally, thank you very much, that's good. That's an intention to use domination, power to manifest in the world, rather than come from a sense of wholeness, a place, their place in the universe that organically manifests what is to be manifest through them. So you have to beware of those who are coming from a place of strengthening their own false sense of self, sometimes called the ego. It can work for a period of time, but ultimately it will turn out to be less than useful in the interaction, because it'll be an interaction between an ego and whatever that ego is focused on for its own gain and aggrandizement. So I would say follow your heart and your intuitive knowing about this person, and then look at the results, the bottom line. Is it working for you? And if it is, that's wonderful. Continue. If it's not working for you, it's time to leave. And remember that between 30 and 50% of the healing response can come from placebo effect, your own belief system. If that person aligns you with a belief system that says healing will occur, between 30 and 50% of people will respond. So you may respond to that person as a result of a placebo effect, and that's just fine, you know? That's just fine. But again, the key thing here still is make sure it's a loving connection. Make sure it's a loving connection. That's my advice based on many years. Even if a placebo effect works, if you're going to someone who's doing healing work, choose a loving person. Well, as a physician, one of the things that we quickly realize is that the body heals itself. We may operate on someone, we may give them antibiotics, but we know that we depend on the body to heal itself. We can assist the body to heal itself. We can enhance the immune system. We can do many other things to balance out the hormonal and the autonomic nervous systems. But we know that what we're primarily doing is assisting the body to heal itself. So, for some people, the goal in learning about healing is to heal themselves. In other words, to do self-healing. And self-healing is fine. Again, a reminder that ultimately healing comes from beyond just your intentionality to heal. Healing also comes from source ultimately. So if you want to heal yourself and you're able to do that, that's wonderful. If you're not able to heal yourself for a variety of reasons, you may be ill, You may be too ill to gather up the energy, because part of the healing process requires energy. There's intentionality that plays a role, and there's grace, another word for the divine energy that's beyond understanding that comes in. So if you don't have enough energy to do your own healing, then definitely accept healing work from someone else who can access and impart the energy as well as the grace and the intentionality. It doesn't matter in that sense whether you do self-healing or healing comes from an apparent other. Only if there's a need to give your own egoic self an opportunity to inflate itself in its importance because you yourself are doing the healing rather than receiving it from another. Well, if that's the purpose of it, fine. But wherever the gift comes, if it's a genuine gift and the outcome results in healing, then just accept it, is my sense. Now, that's regarding self-healing. What I do have a sense that is important is giving yourself the gift of self-love. Loving yourself unconditionally, meaning you totally and completely accept yourself exactly as you are. And if you can do that, that's a deeper healing than a physical or healing. It heals the emotional wounds, and it heals the mental wounding. Sometimes we call the mental wounding beliefs or interpretations, aversions and attachments, judgments of self and others. So if you can love yourself and accept yourself totally exactly as you are, if you can forgive yourself for all the things you did that were unloving to yourself and others, and that you judge yourself for, that you feel guilty and ashamed about it, and then just simply let those go so that what's left is just a pure, simple, innocent love that you have for yourself. What a healing that is. That's a healing that will move you into wholeness. You'll move into oneness with universal consciousness when you can do that. And what you'll feel is peace. You'll feel an inner joy, regardless of the state of your physical body. And you'll feel a sense of freedom, and of course a love that will then radiate out from you to all around you, because sooner or later this body will return to dust. And when you can start loving yourself, you start to tap into that sense of the immortal you, the part of you that has never been born and will never die. And of course, we use the word you because that's, again, part of the languaging problem of describing through words spirit. Well, we have lots of reason to believe, based on very well documented near-death experiences, and that what remains after death is what existed before the death of the physical body, which is consciousness itself. So consciousness existed before it took on a physical body, and then it went through a physical life with all of the experiences, and then when the death of the body occurred, the consciousness remains and continues. Now, again, this is not a subject of great controversy because it's quite well documented. Raymond Moody wrote the first book, Life After Life, And since that book, he's been doing a lot of research on this, and many others have as well. And my own experiences bear this out. I've had 3 experiences which you could call near-death experiences. So I have reason not just to believe, but to know, as best I can know, the existence of a consciousness beyond the physical body. So for me, it's pretty clear. Consciousness exists before, during, and after what we call physical life. So now, I'm not interested in arguing with someone about it. They can have their point of view. I'm just basing what I say on my own direct experience and direct knowing. And I just share that. And, you know, for some people it conflicts with a variety of beliefs that they may have, and that's fine. Not everybody has to agree about things. But it's good to know that when you leave this physical body, your consciousness exists. It may drop some of the experiences that you've had this lifetime, but the consciousness continues. And what that does is it relieves you of the fear of death, if that's all that remains. You know, is the physical body and then the dust that it becomes, and that's the end. Oh, I don't see why I would want to continue, as the physical body is designed to degrade over time. And so it's designed like clothing. You know, you wear it and then it wears out, and then you let it go, and there may be a time when you come back and take on another physical body, or this may be the last time you'll take on a physical body, but your consciousness itself is immortal. So knowing that allows you really to relax into being rather than doing, in the sense that you feel pressure to do within a short period of time to accomplish something. Again, that's a mental creation. So I don't feel a pressure to do and accomplish